Hi, my name is Cristi Collari, and I am the director of Valleycast. And we are here today to bring you a video for our Valleycast Virtual Art and Music Makers Festival. I am at the studio of Keeney Swearer. He's an artist and a bronze sculptor, and he's going to show us around, and we're going to get to see his work and learn about how he does it. Hi, Nick.
Hi, Cristi. Welcome. Hello, everybody else. Cristi asked me to give you a tour of my world, let's put it that way. Let's take a walk up here. And I will introduce you to my humans. This has been a lifelong investigation. Well, let's put it 35 years. And what it is my observations of who we are as human beings. So I see an event or a person type, and I will characterize them in bronze. With time, I learned that I can group and regroup them until different social narratives. And so events in time became more important. But what I came to realize over time is that we don't change very much, so that these characterizations kind of repeat themselves throughout history. I'll give you some of the characters. This is See No Evil. Plague, in this case it could be today's coronavirus, but when I did them in the 1980s, it was the AIDS epidemic. We have the constant struggle of mankind trying to get together, come to agreement, but we rarely do. We're always caught in this tension. That can be sort of represented in the two-faced politician, saying one thing but then doing another thing. Here is the innocent child, the hope for the future, the reason we need to try to do right. A sense of entitlement, accuser or scolder, scolding the sense of entitlement. Pride. Down further we have vanity, where I've coupled it with what I use him sometimes as penny pinching politician, but now he's pinching her. He represents the Harvey Weinsteins of the world. This piece is isolation, and I've got him by himself. He matches out with another piece I have titled Depression. Most of this work is about interpersonal relationships, but occasionally you'll get a person like this who isolates themselves from this bigger society. So they have meaning as individuals, but they have more meaning when you group them. So these pieces are made of cast bronze. Most of them are actually just pinched out of wax to be cast. But these are crude because they're pinched from wax, and they're crude because human beings are crude. My work falls into several categories this way. This is my more serious investigation of life, but I've gone towards laughter and humor. It gets me sort of towards whimsy. But I also do animals that play along this line. So let's take a walk over to the rat race. I chose to bring you to this grouping because they're related to the humans. A lot of people have troubles with my humans because they're naked and they can't get over the nakedness, but if I put clothes on them, they wouldn't be telling the naked truth, and I wouldn't be able to use the bodies as an expressive tool to tell my story. So I started this bunch of work, which is much more playful, and I call this the rat race, and it literally is the race. It's the one who fell down, it's the racer, it's the opposition, it's the jumping for the finish, again opposition, the winner, looking over his shoulder, tease, the one that fell down, the loser. But these take on the characterizations of what many of my humans have done. The accuser or scolder, the questioner, but these are much more playful. These are interesting too, and later on you'll learn how I do these works. But all these works are made from this one piece. But I've made a wax to cast a bronze, and then I've painted the wax up several times, and each time I remanipulate the wax to create the next character here. So all these characters are related to this particular character. So that's the rat race. So this is Chelonia, the flying turtle. And if you think about turtles, they have beaks, so they're very much like birds. And so I have his flippers as being more wing-like. But he's made out of old leather shoes and boots, carpet tubes, champagne bottle dividers, legs, eggs, old shoes, and then cast in bronze from those. Anything that's organic and can be burned away can be cast in bronze. He weighs about 3,000 pounds and he's cantilevering off a metal base. I did him in 1983 while I was working at the Rhode Island Children's Museum. I couldn't work with my wax, so I was working with found object materials. And so this is a found object piece. So this is a little different than the cast work. This is a fabricated work, which means it's assembled out of metal. So this is made out of old metal pipes. The head is actually a beer keg. The feathers are metal pipes that have been cut and bent. So there's some hand forging. These parts are bronze, but they're not cast. They're welded pieces of metal that have been welded up and ground and shaped. This one probably took me 25 years, little by little, to make. Only weighs about 3 tons and about a 16-foot wingspan. These are based off my humans. They're actually a Crimea. They're a human-animal combo. And you'll see that throughout mythology, the Minotaur and all that sort of thing. But these are a little more contemporary. These here represent politics. I mean, here would be the donkey for the Democrats. In this case, I'm hedging my bets. Everybody thinks they're the best party, so I have this guy as a winner, and then I have the Republican elephant also thinking they're the winner. But in truth, with politics, none of us are the winners. So this is a little side bent. I also have done the economy, which we'll walk down and take a look at that. And then I have aspects of human nature, which we'll talk about when we get there. So these are a continuation of the donkey and the elephant, but these are more human nature in a more raw sense. The howling wolf, the fox, the wolf man, the wolf, the aspect of man, the howler, the wolf, the fox, the foxy lady, the bunny, the cougar. I think they're kind of self-explanatory in their own right. But we'll take a walk down and look at the economy. So this is the bull, as in the Wall Street bull, but not as ferocious and active as the Wall Street bull. You never know when the bull market is going to go away, so he's a tentative bull. And down here we have the bear market, who is both scary and scared. Nobody wants a bear market. So these are the pigs. They're more that nasty aspects of who we are as human beings. This is spoiler, raining on other people's parades, telling it like she thinks it is. And this other one over here is know-it-all. It's Ophelia from Shakespeare. And I kind of like her just because she's a mystery piece. I leave her for people just to come across and be kind of shocked by her. In a sense, she's playful to me. These are just more garden pieces. These are more done to support the rest of the work. But there's still an investigation, something fun. This one's titled The Auk. I probably sold 300 of them over the years. But for me, they're actually a lot of fun too, because I'm playing with the elements of art in them. I'm playing with line to create form, or just form, but also the line within form. Or here I'm implying a thigh with line. And so that's what the piece is about, but it's also very loose and light and, and open. This is another one that's just pinched out of wax. This is a bit of a morose piece. When I was turning 60, my father's father died at 56, my father died at 58, and so I started contemplating the question of death and this was my catharsis piece to work through that. I'm now in my 60s, so I made it. But so she's after the Mexican Katrina dolls, but to me she's a little bit more Lady Death. So just in the process of making her, which took several months, it was a contemplation thing for me. I made her so her arms are almost like wings if you look at her in profile. She's just kind of floating. This is an arbor. It's kind of a wedding arch, and it's again fabricated. So this is solid bar stock. This is not pipe, and so each bit of this had to be heated up to cherry red, and then each twist is 360-degree twists. So they're kind of fun to do that way. But then each of them are tapered, which is a lot of work. But it's a metaphor for two families and their courses through life, wrapping around and interchanging with each other and intertwining. And in my theory, each of the flowers is a birth or an event. But metaphorically, it ties itself in knots sometimes, or it twists back on itself sometimes. So each of the elements is a person or a child. So you've met Echo, and this is the final bronze casting of Echo. I've done a sculpture of every one of my dogs over my lifetime just because they're my companion, and Echo truly has been a companion to me. Michelle and Cristi have put together a slide presentation of the process of making him. You probably have already met Echo in our little tour, and if you didn't see him, you've probably heard him. Yep. All right, so the next step here is, so we don't have to fill the whole thing up with clay, we're going to bulk it out a little bit with the interior with styrofoam, but not a whole lot. We're just going to cut some shapes that fit inside the best we can. So we've bulked him out with styrofoam. This will save us from having to put clay everywhere styrofoam is. But we've left ourselves little pockets to hold the clay wrapped around the armature. And here we have applied clay, and it probably took me about 4 weeks to really work this out. And then the next step is to take a rubber mold, and here I've divided the sculpture with aluminum shimming and then painted layers of wax with cheesecloth embedded into it for structure. This will hold the shape of the clay. After that, I'm going to do a mother mold, which is made of plaster to keep the rubber when it's peeled off the clay from being floppy. So here you see the rubber mold and then the plaster mother mold, and you can see the aluminum shims coming out of the mother mold. And on those seam lines where the shims are, I'm going to use little wedges to separate the mother mold from the clay and rubber mold. Here you see the little wedges. Now you see the front of the mother mold coming off, and you see the rubber mold. And then in the third slide, you see the rubber mold inside the mother mold, and then the original clay. And you can see where that aluminum shim is again. And I think I did Echo in 3 pieces, maybe more. The tail might have been separate. Oh, no, the inside of his legs were separate. Then I paint wax, microcrystalline wax, which is a type of wax, into 3/16 of an inch thickness. It's like dipping candles. Probably 25 layers here, painted in at a particular temperature. First 250 degrees, and then after that 150 degrees. That helps so that it goes in cleanly with no bubbles. The next step is to then strip the rubber mold and the wax from the mother mold, and then separate the waxes from the rubber mold. And here are the separated pieces. And there might be some imperfections in the surface, but wax is very comfortable to work, and so you can rework the surface at this point. So here we have the wax pieces reassembled into the whole sculpture, but then cut up so that they'll fit into the mold. You can see how I've perched the head on his back. Also attached are a cup and wax tubes that allow for a plumbing system that will allow the bronze to be poured throughout the sculpture when the time comes. The next step is to put it into a plaster and sand mold. Here we are with a metal cylinder with a screen inside of it to help hold the thing together. And you can see the cup where the bronze will be poured and the vents which will allow the bronze to flow through, pushing the air ahead of it. The next step is to steam as much of the wax out as I can through that cup and vents. So we flip the mold upside down and put a wallpaper steamer up into it. And the steam is at 212 degrees and the mold is still wet, so it allows the wax to drip out without being absorbed into the mold. We can't pour the bronze this way because water and bronze don't get along. They would cause an explosion. And there's still some wax residue left in that mold. So we're going to load this into a kiln. And I do several at a time because the process is so expensive and takes so much time that it's worth doing a production for. So here we have steamed the molds out and we're loading them onto a cart. Those molds weigh about 500 to 1,000 pounds a piece. And so there's about 4,000 to 5,000 pounds of molds going to be put into the kiln. I have the cart on a railroad track because it's so heavy that to push it, I take several guys. Here we are pushing it into the kiln where it will remain for about a week. Using gas burners, I will take it up to about 1,000 degrees and hold it there for 5 or 6 days to make sure all the residue is burnt out and all the wax or all the water is removed from the mold. Here is a picture from the portal at the bottom of the kiln, and that was the wax burning out. Here the molds have been burnt out. They're now dry and free of wax, but they're very brittle. The moisture that was holding them together has been evaporated off, and so I have to treat them like eggs. So very carefully we strap onto them and we're going to put them into a sand pit. The sand will help them from breaking open when the bronze is poured into them. So here I'm plugging a mold on the bottom. I didn't mention it earlier, but I have the cup and the vents on the top, but I've also put a plug or drains on the bottom to help air circulate through and help to remove the wax. I'm plugging them with a little piece of bronze and a piece of fire-resistant fiberglass cloth, which will then get sealed and packed into the sand when we place them in the pit. Here we are preparing the pit for the molds, and the sand has been wetted so that it can be packed tight. And we've measured the depth for each mold. We want them to be about 3 inches above the lip of the pit. The pit is 7 feet deep, so I could pour mold 7 feet tall if necessary. But it's very important that the sand be packed tight, and here he is ramming the sand at the bottom. And that's the point where those drains will connect, and they need to connect very tightly. And here we are using a crane because the molds still weigh anywhere between 300 and 600 pounds. And we're using, instead of chains, we're using straps in order not to damage the mold. We actually put a board across between the tops of the strap so the strap doesn't squeeze the mold. You don't want to crack the mold at all. Any crack will fill with bronze and leak into the sand, hopefully, or completely leak and destroy the mold. There's a lot that can go wrong at this point, and one has to be very, very careful. This is weeks of work to get to this point. Here's the bronze melt furnace, and we're preheating bronze ingots on top of the furnace. Each one of those ingots weighs about 22 pounds. And here you can see the straps and the board between the straps to keep them from pinching the mold. We also have covers over the cup and open vent holes because any sand that might get down into the mold would get included in the bronze and make an ugly mess that's very difficult to fix. So cleanliness is very, very important here. I generally use the same people to help me pour each time because they've had the experiences of not getting sand in the mold. It takes such amount of time to get to this point that we have a big party on this day and usually several spectators to celebrate it. This is the point where they actually become permanent. They're not finished yet. They're about halfway toward being finished, but they are now permanent when they're in bronze. Bronze can last for centuries and is virtually indestructible unless by mankind trying to destroy it. Here we are vacuuming any sand that might have gotten kicked into the molds. We're being very careful not to suck cold air through because that would cause cracks. Here the molds have been completely buried up to the top and the sand has been rammed around them, and you can see the covers that will be removed before we pour them. They still are about 500 degrees in temperature. All right, so here we are still melting bronze. Those are ingots, and each of them weighs about 22 pounds. And some of the things that aren't ingots are the old plumbing systems from the old molds that can be reused. You can reuse about 30% of your bronze in a crucible. But we're preheating them to put them in because any moisture would cause steam and an explosion and bronze flying up in your face. So you don't want that. I've also thrown a piece of plate glass, window glass, on top of the crucible, and it has melted and made a scum on top. It basically keeps hydrogen from being sucked in from the atmosphere into the bronze and making it more porous. So it's called a cover flux, a protective flux. And before I can pour it, that needs to be skimmed off. So you'll see us skimming here at some point, and it's this very scummy, molten glass. And here we are working really fast. We're lowering the tongs around the crucible, and there's a lock, and we lock the tongs, and this is an overhead crane that's pulling it out. That's 600 pounds of bronze, and you don't want to spill it, but if you do, usually you would spill it into the pit. That little bit of flame you see is a piece of cardboard that I set on a base block there to create a carbon layer so that it won't stick to the crucible. Here we are skimming, getting the last little bit of that cover flux off, because you don't want that in your molds either. That will get trapped in the bronze and become what's called an occlusion, which are very difficult to repair. Right now we're pulling the covers off, taking our time because we have about 10 to 12 minutes before the bronze would cool too much on us. And then the person running the hoist is trying to help the two people pouring line up the spout. And a good pour is a direct hit, but a little bit of spill isn't going to hurt anything. I can melt it down again. And sometimes I get interesting shapes that I use in sculpture. And our hoist is a little stuck here, so we're making an adjustment. Now I've decided what mold to pour into by what weight I need, and so I'm going to try to make sure I don't run out in pouring a mold. You'd be big trouble if you run out. You can't really pour twice down a mold. So I've weighed each of the waxes. 11 pounds of wax would weigh around 120 pounds in bronze. This is a pretty good pour. He did a little spill to find his place, but now he's trying to pour it evenly, and it came up to the top and into the vents. You see bronze, so you know the mold's full, but the bronze wants to shrink back as it cools. And so right now they just added a little bit more. And here I'm putting a piece of what was called insa wool. It's a fiber blanket that can resist heat to let it cool more slowly to keep the shrinking from happening. And that's a much better pour. And here's a case of where the measuring the amount was very important, because are we gonna run out or not? And no, we just make it. And we're all amazed. So that was that batch. And we're going to do another batch of molds this day. So we're about to put the crucible back into the furnace. So we're reversing the process. So what they're holding is called the shank, and they need to transfer it back to the tongs. So he's lowering the hoist, and there's this bail that's going to be grabbed here. Yep, take the bail off, unlock the locks on the shank. The crucible's made of silicon carbide that can take this temperature, can take about 3,200 degrees. And you don't want any cracks there. When I'm done at the end of the day, I put the crucible back into the hot furnace and let it cool down very slowly so there's no temperature stress cracks. So we're missing a little bit here. We don't show us digging them out of the pit. We waited about an hour for the bronze to solidify. And now we're rolling them into what I call my kiln building so that we can break the molds open. When we break them, what you saw in wax with the tubes will be in these molds. We wait probably about 3 hours before we really break them, or they can get distorted if the bronze is exposed too quickly. But they'll remain hot for almost 24 hours. The plaster sand mix is a very good insulator. So this was a mystery mold. It leaked, and you can see on the bottom a big bronze blob. And so we were very interested as to why and whether we got the mold. We did, because we had enough bronze. So I'm very carefully with an axe chopping through the screen that's just inside the plaster, helping hold it together. And then it will split apart. And then it's like an archaeological dig, trying to carefully work the bronze away from all the parts of the bronze or the sculpture without damaging the sculpture. And after that, then there's several weeks of cutting it apart and welding it back together, which we're not showing here. It's a very complex and tedious process. You can see this is just the residue from one mold here, and you can begin to see the parts becoming exposed. In the end, we end up with several tons of the residue. So here was the original clay. Here is him reassembled, welded back together. And here he is now completely finished. In this case, I did only a little bit of a patina. I actually wire brushed and polished parts of him. But in his eyes, I used a chemical to darken it. And next to it is my Echo. He's about 6 years old in that picture. Welcome to my work, and I'm happy to have given you a tour. We'll end it here. This is Scapegoat, one of my favorite pieces, kind of representing the last few years of our political system. But also you can see another whole body of my work is this linear drawing, seascape stuff. And I'm just building components to make a long fence with a sleeping sea woman and forlorn boy looking for his lost love and mermen. This is just kind of one I worked on little by little over a long period of time. But the important thing is to have fun with the work and to enjoy my work and to ask questions of the work and to always ask questions about what the artwork is about. Don't always take it at face value. Be thinking. Think about art. Thanks for coming.